and things of that nature, but they were more focused on the sacrifice and the physical thing than they were the spiritual side of it. And so when they're sitting there thinking about that, he said, "These things which you see, the days will come in which no stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." So this is something that they are eventually, what's the word for it? Losing the everyone knows the ending that we're about to get to, but sneak peek preview to what's coming. This is something, the temple being torn down, no stone being left upon another, is something that's actually going to be coming back into Jesus's testimony here in just a couple of days in his life. But he's saying all these things are going to be toned, and there's not going to be another one left on top of another. Um, and so, what they view as so important is going to be done away with. And um, sometimes that can be very needed in our life as well, because we can become so fixated on the physical that we lose sight of the spiritual side of it. And so he's saying these things are going to come down, and if you can only imagine their thought or what might be going through their mind, here's this thing that they put in such high pristine, and now it's going to be taken down. He's saying it's just going to be taken down. Later on, he's going to say it's going to be rebuilt. Um, in verse 7, it says, "So they asked him, saying, 'Teacher, but when will these things be? And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place?'" And here he starts talking about the temple um, coming down. So let's put into context. He says, "And he said to them, 'Take heed that you not be deceived.'" Now I'm going to kind of go through these one by one, because although he's talking to them about something that is soon going to take place, or in the more near future going to take place, these exact same warnings can apply to us today as well. Take heed that you not be deceived. Was it gonna be easy for them to be deceived, here in the early part of the church, or even during this time once Jesus is about to leave the physical earth? Is it gonna be easy for them to be deceived? Absolutely. Is it easy for us to be deceived today if we don't have our guard up? The same issue that they were dealing with then is still an issue today. So he says, "Take heed that you not be deceived." Should we also take heed today, just as he was telling them to take heed? Absolutely, because we don't need to be deceived. What happens if we don't take heed and we are deceived? Is there a risk to that? I mean, yes, you like gambling or something because you're gambling with your soul, right? I mean, you don't take that risk. Don't take. There's no reason to gamble on it. So take heed so that we are not deceived. Work out your own salvation. Double check what you hear. Double check what someone says to you. Don't just take Google AI for the gospel truth. Let's make sure the gospel is actually saying what that truth might be. And it says, "For many will come in my name." Did this happen then? Absolutely. Does this still happen probably today in some sense? Yeah, I guess in somewhat not maybe in 2025, but yeah, a couple years, a handful of generations ago, yeah, people would come and proclaim to have a new prophecy, a new teaching. They make up a whole new religion for it. They got all these new books, they got all these different teachings. "For many will come in my name." Did this happen shortly after he's going to ascend to heaven in the early church? Did they face these things? Yeah. Is there a major religion today that would claim that someone came after him that was going to be a new teacher or something like that? Yeah, there's going to be some of those, right? So he's giving a warning. "For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and the time has drawn near." Then he says, "Therefore, do not go after them." We have to know what is truth, and we have to know what we need to be chasing after. Verse 9, it says, "But when you hear of wars and commotions, do not be terrified." What they're about to experience here in several years um, is probably going to be terrifying if you look at it from an earthly sense. Um, Destruction, war, famine, sickness, all kinds of things is coming upon them. And if you take a earthly and worldly look at it, it is going to be terrifying. And again, that same thought applies to us today. If there is wars all around us, if there is famine around us, if there is sickness spreading around us, if you look at it from a worldly and an earthly sense, is that terrifying? Yeah, I could lose my life. I could lose all my possessions. I could lose everything that I've come accustomed to. But if you look at it from a heavenly sense, if you lose your physical life, what will you gain as a Christian? You started your spiritual life. If you've lost everything that you have on earth, what will you have at the end of your life? All the treasures of heaven. And so it's all of this is temporary. And what they're about to go through is going to be a lot of trials, and there's going to be thousands of people that are going to die at the hands of evil men, but they have to persevere just as we have to persevere. And so he's saying, do not be terrified when you hear of these wars and these commotions, because these things are going to happen. He says, for these things must come to pass first, but then the end will come, but then the end will not come immediately. These things are going to take place. You're going to have these trials. You're going to have these persecutions and these wars and these commotions, but the end is not going to come immediately. What does that mean we are going to have to do? What does that mean they were going to have to do during this time of what Jesus is talking about? If it doesn't happen immediately, what are you going to have to do? Wait, keep the faith, keep pressing, keep believing, um, keep sticking to the truth, not changing, not wavering, not trying to change what you say in public to lessen what those rulers or the people persecuting you might say. Does that still apply to us today? If we come under persecution, do you see people today maybe back up statements or maybe try to lighten a statement and kind of veer away from the truth so that the person asking them the question might not persecute them as severely? Right? Is that what we need to be doing? Stick with the truth, right? And so the same thing here for them. So it's not going to come immediately. The destruction is not going to come immediately. Therefore, they're going to have to be ready to endure. And in verse 10, it says, then he said to them, nations will rise against nations, kingdoms against kingdoms. Going to happen here? Does it happen in our world today? It sure does, right? And there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilence, and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. Things are going to happen. There is going to be signs. There's going to be tribulation. There's going to be things that are taking place that are not going to necessarily be easy to get through. But before all these things, they will lay hands on you and persecute you. I encourage everyone. I'll even I'll go get the name of the book that I had to read in college. Go read the history on the early church, and you will see some folks with some great faith. What they went through very, very, very early church, this right here is what it's talking about. Um, you couldn't worship like this is right now. That wasn't just a thing that you could do at certain time periods. Poor Brian over here could be worshiping one day, and the next thing you know, he's led off into captivity. He's martyred. He's burned at the stake, or who knows what, right? And they're sitting there doing that, and then what they're really wanting is for other people to see this one person go through this persecution, and then the other ones forsake their faith. But the early church, when you start reading the history, a lot of them see it, and it's almost a sign of rejoicing. It almost strengthens them. It's the opposite of what their enemies are wanting, right? Because they're like, if that person can go all the way to the point of death, so can I. And they build off of it. And that's something that I just don't know if America is the least bit ready for. If we had to face what the early church was facing, um, we think attendance could be low now. Um, the it would test a lot of our faith, and we have to be ready for if persecution does come like that. But it says they're going to deliver you. They're going to lay hands on you and persecute you. It happens. You can read early church history. Deliver you up to synagogues and prisons. Is this something that folks were worried about even in Jesus's time prior to this statement? Yeah, people were worried that they might get handed over to the synagogues. They could get kicked out of the synagogues. They're going to be put in prison. Does this sound like something that maybe we read at the beginning of Acts that happened to Peter and some of the apostles teaching? Right? Did they get jailed for teaching the truth? Right? And then what were they told to do? You got to stop saying it. You can't be doing that. Is that what Peter and them decided to do? Was just, well, we'll just stop teaching. They keep on going, right? They say we have to listen to God and not to man. And so they're going to be delivered up to synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. So just as the prophets before were ridiculed and were put up to death, just as Jesus is going to have a false testimony and put up to death, so they are also going to come after us and put us into prisons or them, I'm sorry, putting them into prisons. And they're going to be brought before kings and rulers for his sake, because of his teaching, right? Because of his truth. But verse 13, but it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony. How can that be an occasion for testimony? Anybody?
If they were brought before a court, they would have to contend what they've been doing. I think that would be a testimony.
Yeah. When you look at, and this again goes back to the early church history, not that it's like, some gospel truth, but you can see people's great testimony when they face persecution, and it should encourage us as well. When you go through something like that, you have to give a testimony before the kings and the rulers or whoever you might be standing before. But the way that you live your life can also be a testimony. Your endurance through that can be a testimony, can be an encouragement to other folks. And so that's what he's getting at here. You can be a testimony on these occasions, right? Don't look at these occasions as something that has no value. Sometimes we can look at a poor situation or a trial and we see no added value, right? We're like, this is terrible. Why do I even have to go through this? There's no benefit to this. Is there benefits to trials? Yeah. It can help us with endurance. It can help us grow. We even have a chance to be a testimony to somebody else because we know who provides the way. We know that He's never going to leave us or forsake us, right? And so we know that there's something greater. We can be a testimony for other people. We can also share our testimony before others. And in verse 14, he continues on. He says, "Therefore, settle it in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist." So he's saying they are going to put you up to this. You're going to have to share a testimony, but don't sit here and start trying to trouble in your heart what all you have to say and how you're going to get out of this and what you need to say. Don't meditate on it beforehand, because he says, I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict. Go ahead, Sue.
Is he speaking to the apostles at this in this speech about when the Holy Spirit's going to say?
He's going through he's speaking to several in the crowd. He's got his disciples there. If you go to Matthew 23, I'll even read this for you, or Matthew 24, I'm sorry. So in Matthew 24, to give context, it says, Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. Then he sat down on the Mount of Olives. The disciples came to him privately, telling, saying, Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of age? And then Jesus goes on his answer. And so Matthew 24 kind of gives you the context, that it's his disciples. They come to him privately. So it's not like he's um, on a boat as he's been previously in his ministry and he's like speaking out there in the sea. Good question. Let's see. So don't be having this in your heart, what you need to say and what you should say beforehand, which I think is funny because I think we get caught in this today. Now he's not going to just plug into our head what we need to be saying. We have his truth, but sometimes we can get so caught up thinking about how we're going to respond to a potential question we might get asked or a potential situation we might find ourselves in. Now, not that you should not be prepared for situations that could happen, but sometimes you can worry yourself sick worrying about a situation that has like a 1% chance of ever happening. And you're like, I know it's going to happen. And you're treating it like it's 99.9% going to happen, when in reality, it's like a 1%. And all that worry you're putting into it, I think Dale actually mentioned this today. Can you add a single day or a second or anything to your life by sitting there worrying about tomorrow? You can't, right? And so we have to know that He's going to provide for us. So he's telling him in verse 15, he said, I'm going to give you the testimony, right? And your adversaries are not going to be able to contradict it or resist. Can you contradict the truth? Does his truth contradict itself? The testimony is going to be true, right? And then in verse 16, it goes on to even more what they're going to face. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Now, this is something that Jesus has mentioned earlier. Um, chasing after the truth and holding on to the truth and persevering through persecution very well, and he says here, are going to have some divided families or some brothers, parents might even, relatives might even put you out to death, right? This is not going to be a happy-go-lucky per se thing where everyone's 100% on. When you go through persecution, does 100% of the people stay with the course, or do some decide to turn? Right? Some decide to turn. Some decide that you might need to turn as well, so that you don't lose your life. Um,
Some of them will stay on it, and will their lives.
Yep.
It's kind of scary. I mean, you just said, don't worry about what you're going to say, but by the way, maybe get killed. So kind of a lot of promise there of what could happen.
and this is something he's going to address it here in the next two verses. But it's a good point because did you have something, Dale?
Well, just kind of going along with what Sue was saying, he's addressing this to the apostles, and he's addressing it to his disciples, and he's going to say in the context here that these things are going to come to pass before this generation passes away. So it's not that he's going to, in the future, in our put his words automatically in our mind to be able to answer people. We're going to have to read his words and study to show ourselves approved and be ready to answer anyone who asks us. So there's more effort that we're going to have, but he's in this time, he's going to send the Holy Spirit to the apostles for sure. And then some of these disciples are going to have spiritual gifts, and so they're going to know how to answer those that bring them before the synagogues. And I think about Peter, he gives a defense in Acts 3 and 4. I think about Stephen in Acts chapter 7. He's brought before and he has to answer. Paul was before Festus and Felix and Agrippa, and eventually before Caesar, right? And so he's got an opportunity to testify to all.
And James get his head cut off in chapter 12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so it happened to some of them very short period of time.
Yeah. And this part right here is not referring to us. So if I make a mistake and I make it sound like it's referring to us today, this is not. This is something he is talking to his disciples, and Dale brings up a good context. So Jesus is not just going to do not think that this verse says you can just go hunky dory through life and Jesus is just going to give you the answers that you need to say to somebody. He has given us the answers that we need to say to somebody, and it's right here, which means we need to be studying, right? This is a different context here, right? They're going to have the gift of the Holy Spirit once you get into the beginning of Acts, or it's going to come. They're going to be able to speak in different tongues. They're going to have help with their testimony, and they are going to face all of these things. And you can see it right there, starting in Acts. You can start seeing all of it unfold. And as you read through the rest of the writings in the rest of the New Testament, you can see some of them unfold as well. But what I think is so interesting about this, and this is something that the apostles haven't quite gripped it by this point, but they're going to in the beginning of Acts, and then later on, you're going to really see more people start to take this. But they view their life a lot differently than I think we probably view our life today. Um, and even look at you start reading Thessalonians. What were they worried about? Have we missed it? Have we missed the resurrection? They were worried about missing the resurrection, all these other things. Um, they were looking as their life as once this life ends, I've got something better. They hadn't lost sight of that. Sometimes I think we can lose sight of that. And I've said this before. We think we just live to whatever age, and then we pass on, and then boom, we get the reward. But it might not be so. We might very well face persecution similar to this, right? It doesn't seem very likely right now, but who's to say in 15, 20 years that persecution might not come upon us? Think about let's see, I think the first iPhone, someone might know this, probably came out around 2008, 2009. I guess you had Blackberries before that, right? So that's 15 something years ago, right? When that stuff started coming out. Now it has AI on it, right? We used to joke, the Back to the Future movies, they used to have like the little watch you could talk to people. You can literally do that with the smartwatch now, right? hovering cars, they're working on that. We have drones that could probably literally, deliver a package. We have cars that can drive themselves, right? Think about what's changed just in the short little while. Now, add 20 years, right? Are we guaranteed that America's just going to be some safe place all the time, that we won't ever face persecution? No, right? And so this is talking about something that they are going to be facing with. And very well, something similar could happen to us, right? But this is something that they are facing with, and they are having to really put into perspective what their life is, because their family very well could turn against them and they could lose their life.
And depending on where in the world you are, right? People in the world being persecuted and crucified for believing in Christ.
Yeah, it's life is but a vapor, and we have to remember that and keep it that way, and keep our mindset focused that we're not working to win. Um, how do I want to say this? We are living to make sure that we get to obtain the life that is better, and not the life that is better here on earth, right? We want the life that is truly better. Um, and so it says at the end of verse 16 that some of you to death. So some of them are going to die. Verse 17, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. I like this part. But not a hair of your head shall be lost, but your patience possesses your soul. Does anyone have the ESV out? If not, I'm gonna see if I still have it. I have it right here. I like the way it reads it better. Um, it says in verse 18, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your lives.
Hey, it just said they were going to die, and now he says they're not going to perish. What's happened?
So you can die. Can we die in our physical life?
Yeah.
But if you physically die, can you gain true life by it? So by our endurance, right? What happens if you're in the middle of the race and you're tired? So you just stop. You don't have the endurance to get to the finish line. You don't gain the real life. Um, they are going to face death. Everyone is going to face death. I don't care if someone murders you, like they were potentially going to face here, or you die of something physical. Everyone is going to face death unless Christ comes back beforehand. All right, everyone is going to face death. So the question is, are you going to endure in order to gain what true life is? Are you going to live a life that truly gives life? Is the way you could look at it. Um, so our patience, our endurance, is what gives us the true life. It's what should possess our souls in the the place that our soul gets to inhabit for eternity. If that makes sense. So they're going to have to go through endurance. They're going to have to be strong in faith. They're going to have to continue on. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Some will die, some will endure.
Like
They can speak of it.
both. You can endure and still be killed. So you can endure up until the point of death, but you gain life, spiritually speaking. So some are going to endure, and then maybe they won't face a physical, like a martyr death. They might be able to. They might not. They might just not be one of the ones that gets martyred. But they're going to have to endure until they draw their last breath. Just like all of us have to endure our life until we draw our last breath, right? It doesn't do you any good if you give up the day before you draw your last breath. If you decide to forsake Christ, it's like, oh, if you would have held out one more day, right? A terrible decision that'd be. Um, but they're going to. Some of them are going to endure up into the point of death, just like Christ endured to the point of death. Mark.
When he said, not hair, but perish, I think of what he said about how God does some of our hair. How much he cares for us. And so to me, it's a full reflection of how much he cares for us, like he knows when every sparrow falls.
Yeah, and you have to.
Away.
Yeah, when you really think about it, it shows such great detail and such great care, because he knows who is enduring. And he knows what we are going through, right? He knows that we're going through trials and tribulation. He knows that we are enduring, and he also knows that people are hating us for his name's sake. So, and this is something here and something we can still get today. Um, that's a good thought, though, as well. So, there's all types of endurance. There's endurance that leads to death, and endurance that leads to us drawing our final breath, which is also death. There's an endurance that could also lead to Christ coming back before we draw our final breath, and so on and so forth. So, the importance is endurance up until you cannot physically, I guess, endure anymore, right? You endure all the way until this life is over. And that's the key to it. And that's what he's telling them here. Don't give up. Any other thoughts or comments?
There's one thing that's left out. Go ahead, please.
Just kind of the idea that you may lose your physical life, he's not gonna lose track of it.
Yep.
Right, he knows where you stood, right, what you did, what you believed in, how you endured, right, the fact that you didn't give in, he's not gonna forget, right, so it's not that the hair of your head's gonna be harmed, it's not a hair of your head will be lost, he's not gonna lose track of it,
Mhm.
right, he's not gonna lose track of you.
Yeah, and he's not going to forget or lose track of all the ones that did endure. You're not going to be forsaken. Mark.
Yeah, and there's one other thing that people do during persecution. They leave and spread the word elsewhere.
Yep.
As they did early on. And that's the only thing that's not mentioned in what we've been discussing.
Yeah. And what I think is that Paul is Saul and then Paul. It's just it's so fascinating to me how God used that moment. Because of because the persecution of Saul, it was spread. People were not wanting what he was coming to town to bring. And so it helped spread. And then what happened? Saul turned to Paul, and then he helped spread the word. And boy, God just used it both ways, didn't he? And so it's good points. When it goes into verse 20, it says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by enemies or armies, then know that its destruction is near." I should have kept my finger in Matthew 24. 1 second. So in Matthew 24, just so we can keep into context, because some folks will use this the wrong way. Verse 15 of Matthew 24 says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." So we're in the same spot as we are over here in Luke, but just know the phrasing. So it says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that destruction or that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. What's going to happen?
Destruction of Jerusalem.
It's coming down. Something that they look at as so permanent, so mighty, so strong. Their stronghold, their earthly stronghold, is about to be shown to not be that strong, because you should have a heavenly stronghold, right? And our stronghold should be in Christ. And so when they see this coming, there's going to be a sign, because they're going to be able to see Jerusalem surrounded by these armies. They're going to know that it's near. And then he starts telling them what they ought to be doing, and some woes to it. Why would someone who is pregnant, why would that be a woe during this?
Pass it along.
Yeah, good luck. Not fun. I watched a crazy documentary the other day. It was crazy. It was about the Black Hawk helicopter that went down in Somalia. And when they were trying to get out, when the United States forces were trying to get out, they got trapped, and they go into this one house, and the lady had literally just given birth. And there they are, just there's shooting and chaos going on, right outside of her house. Is that ideal? No. Is this ideal if you're pregnant? No, right? Um, because if you're pregnant, it's not going to be ideal to get away. If you're nursing a baby, it's really not going to be ideal. And why is it not ideal? Because there's going to be great distress in the land and wrath upon the people. There's going to be a lot of distress. Um, and so he tells them, flee to the mountains. Let those in the midst of her depart. Um, don't enter into the country. Because why? Because there's going to be vengeance. The things that have been spoken are going to be fulfilled. And then it goes into verse 24, and this goes into the persecution as well. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all the nations. People are going to be captive. People are going to um, die by the edge of the sword. There is going to be mass destruction. The temple is coming down, right? And something new is coming. And it says, "In Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles." How do you think they like that phrase? Do you think if a Jew heard that statement, do you think that would be almost like the biggest insult that they could have? No, not them. Absolutely not them, right? Um, it says, until the times that the Gentiles are fulfilled. So there's going to be a coming after this as well, right? This is talking about the temple and the persecution that it's going to be by, and who it's going to be by as well. So,
Was
you,
the temple defiled at this time by Romans? What they did in the temple wasn't it?
well, right before, let's see what we're on. Is it Wednesday? Am I still thinking right? No, we're still on Tuesday. So the day before this, so literally the day before this. This is Tuesday. On Monday, he had just cleared the temple because they were selling, and he said it was a den of robbers. And so there already is.
Destruction of Jerusalem. Wasn't there defiling being done in the temple or?
Oh, yeah, I thought you were talking about today or in this. Yes. Do you have something to add to it?
Well, he's hearkening back to the time of Daniel, the
Yeah.
prophecy that Daniel gives about the abomination of desolation that's gonna take place. Happens under Antiochus Epiphanes during the Greek period, where Antiochus comes in and he basically gets his head handed to him. And wants to kick the dog on the way back home, and so he comes to Jerusalem and he ends up sacrificing a pig on the altar, and they can't use the altar for a period of time because it's been defiled. And so Jesus is harkening back to, remember when that happened and you couldn't use the temple and you couldn't offer sacrifice, because this is gonna harken towards that. Not that somebody's coming in to defile the temple, but they're coming in and they're gonna destroy it.
Yeah.
And during the siege, there's a time where the Romans don't really want to fight them at the temple, but because the Jews kind of hold up there, and the Romans eventually decide that they're going to go into the temple and kill them in the temple and destroy the temple. But at first, the Roman soldiers didn't want to do that. But you can tell that this isn't talking about the end of time, because there's signs that are coming, and he tells them to flee. So if this is Judgment Day, fleeing to the mountains isn't going to help, right?
Yeah.
Not going to be a bit of good.
And some people will use this. That's why I referenced it. Some people will use this for like the end of times. It's not. It's talking about the temple. It's talking about Jerusalem. It's talking about that. So don't fall for that if you hear it. But that is a good point, because they're not going to be able to use it anymore. It's going to be done away with. Man, that clock's 2 minutes ahead. That thing's fast. All right, we're going to go into the next part. Unless there's any more questions or comments.
Well, he answered their question. They said, what's gonna be, what do we see before it's about time?
Yeah.
And he actually, he doesn't always answer questions, but he did this time.
Yeah.
Pretty cool that he gave them a sign to look for.
And a lot of the times he'll give them the answer. They don't always pick up on the answer. They don't realize the answer. They misunderstand the answer.
Well,
They got this.
because they saw the signs when Rome was
Mhm.
surrounding the city, and they got out.
Mhm.
Christians didn't have to suffer.
Yeah.
With this, but the Jews did.
You face destruction when you decide not to heed the call. But when you heed the call and you listen to it, you gain life. And so it pays to listen to the GPS. Verse 25, this is where we'll end with the last like 3 minutes we have. It says, "And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth, uh, and on the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth. For the power of the heavens will be shaken. They will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near." So here he's starting this transition of, we've gone through the temple, we've talked about what's going to happen with the temple, but they did ask other questions. And he says there's going to be signs in the sun and the moon and in the stars and on the earth. There's distress of nations. And in verse 26, with the last little bit that we have, I'll focus on that one. But men's hearts failing them from fear at the expectations of those things which are coming on earth. Mankind's hearts are going to fail if you sit there and you look at the bad around you. It could have happened in this time. Go out here and let your heart just soak in the terribleness of the things that happen around us in the world, and see if your heart is just loving what it's seeing. If you put your hope and your trust in earthly things, your heart is going to fail you. Um, and then it goes on to say, it says, "They will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with power and great glory." And then in verse 28, it really gives us the hope. "Now, when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near." If you go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve made a little mistake, didn't they? And when he comes walking through the garden, what do? Hide. Can you hide when he decides to come back and collect his harvest? You can't hide. Adam and Eve couldn't hide. We can't hide. But should a Christian hide when he decides to make his coming back one day? You can look up, you can lift up your heads, because redemption is drawing near. The end is here. You've endured to the end. Something better is now taking place. Rescuing is now at hand. It's almost like when Peter walks out of the boat, he starts to walk on water. He starts to sink a little bit and he reaches up his hand. When Jesus, if we're here taking our last breath, or if we're still on this earth when Jesus comes back, um, it is literally that hand sticking out, and you've made it. You've endured to the end. Now it's just, and he'll say this later, make sure your life is worthy of it. And so we need to make sure that is always a thing as well. But um, we have such a greater hope, and we can learn it by what they are going to face, or what they've already faced it now, but what they are going to soon endure. They are going to have to endure. They've had to heed the call to get out of Jerusalem, right? Um, they're going to have to go through persecutions, but God's not going to lose track of the ones that endured. And the same thing is for us today. It doesn't matter where you are, God is not going to lose track of his children. We can have so many things at our house, or who knows what, that we can lose track of the things that we have, and we can misplace things. We might accidentally throw something away because we don't think it's of any value, and then we soon later learn that it is of value, and we wish we wouldn't have thrown it away. God does not lose track of his children. And God wants all of his children to come home, all of his creation to come home. And so if we endure to the end, we gain the life that is truly worth living. And so let us always remember that this life here on earth is temporary. And if we endure to this end of the temporary life, we get to have a life that is truly wonderful and truly something to be joyous about. And so, with that, unless there's any questions or comments, I will turn it over to Brian for a song, and then Marcus for a wonderful devotional. Thank you. Thank you.
390. 392. Well,
You sound like I feel. My father was an English professor at Murray State University for quite a number of years. I was an English major. Words are important. I took French in high school. My wife has taught French. She took a French course in her, I guess she was in her 50s or 60s, up in back at the Harvard of Canada for a summer. Words important. I hate the word elders. Not really hate, dislike. Now, isn't that a better word choice? Dislike. I like the word shepherd. Does one convey to you something more than the other in those two words? To me, shepherd does. And so I prefer, when I'm talking about elders, to refer to them as shepherds. I prefer to call him John the Immerser rather than John the Baptist, because no translation is necessary about what is meant. And some versions will actually do that sort of thing. And the reason I like the word, let's go back to shepherd, is because that more closely associates elders with who's the boss. He's the high priest. We are priests. He's the good shepherd. And the leaders in congregations across the world are shepherds for the good shepherd. I love that thought. I love that thought. So keep saying elders, and that's okay. Keep saying baptize or baptism, and that's okay. And say obedience rather than following. That's okay. All of those other words are okay. I just prefer the nicer ones, the ones that are more here. John 10, I'm going to read through verse 30. Truly, truly I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, that's another word, sheep, that's used as a negative about people. Oh, they're just a bunch of sheep. They follow anything. It is an honor to be a saint. It is an honor to be a sheep because of who is leading the sheep. He doesn't lead the goats. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him, the doorkeeper opens and the sheep hear his voice. And he calls his own sheep. He calls them by name and leads them out. Leads, follow. Leads, follow. When he puts forth all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. A stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus spoke to them, but they did not understand what those things were, which he had been saying to them. So Jesus said to them again, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my own. My own know me, even as the Father knows me. And I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep, which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it again. No one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down of my own initiative. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father. Well, a division occurred again among the Jews because of these words. Many of them were saying, "He has a demon and is insane. Why do you listen to him?" Others were saying, "These are not the sayings of a demon possessed. A demon cannot open the eyes of the blind, can he?" At that time, the feast of the dedication took place at Jerusalem, not Dodge, Jerusalem. Just to correct you, get out of Dodge. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. The Jews then gathered around him and were saying to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly." Jesus answered them, "I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, these testify of me. But you do not believe because you are not of my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I give eternal life to them, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one." I think, looking upon the audience here, that we're sheep. Am I right? Shake your head. Do you like being a sheep? I think we should. Because He gave his life for the sheep. Have you ever watched real sheep, the ones with wool? If you see them around here, or if you see goats in a pasture, there'll be a donkey there. Why is the donkey there? Who knows why the donkey's there? Yeah, exactly. The donkey will take care of them. The donkey is the substitute sheep for the real sheep with the wool. So look upon your elders as the donkeys. Just kidding. Words are important. I want to be considered a shepherd, and I want to follow him and no one else. The invitation is about following him. And I expect that the people in this audience know what the start of that is. The entrance into the gate is the water, where you leave behind the evil person, the sinful person, and all people are sinners. And you rise up to a new life that has been given to you. You're a new creature. You're born again. You have arisen from the water as a sheep to accept the Good Shepherd. And I pray that all of us here will continue to follow that. Now, if there is a need that any of you have for prayer, or any other need that you have of a spiritual nature that is troubling you, you may come as we stand and sing.